In this lecture on global health, we'll build off of our previous lectures and discussion on issues such as structural inequality, considering access to healthcare on a global level, as well as the differential burden of disease globally. Some of the big questions that we can consider in thinking about global health. The first thing to come to grips with is, what is health? How do we define health? How do we define disease in relation to that? These are very much cultural, and we see in the United States quite a bit of intracultural variation that's occurring, and then indeed, in fact, multiple cultures within the United States interacting, all with models of health. And so issues about what constitutes ill health, or what constitutes the absence of health, or the presence of disease, and when medical intervention is potentially necessary, or seeking out health in other areas that are outside of biomedicine. So who has the power to determine health, determine what health is, and then on a global level, how should health inequalities be addressed? How exactly should global health issues be addressed? We have a number of entities with the United Nations. In the globalization of health and wellness, we see entities such as the World Health Organization, a number of UN entities such as UNAIDS, UNICEF, which all discuss health in one form or another. Since we are looking at global health in the context of anthropology, I'll discuss medical anthropology. We'll go through and build off of our previous lectures and work in infectious diseases, and I'll talk a little bit about HIV and AIDS, malaria, and Ebola, a very recent outbreak of Ebola in 2014. So medical anthropology is a subfield of anthropology which draws upon cultural, biological, and linguistic anthropology. The focus of medical anthropology is to enable us to better understand those factors which influence a number of different things, including health and well-being, broadly defined, the experience and distribution of illness, the prevention and treatment of sickness, different healing processes, the social relations of therapy management, and the cultural importance and utilization of pluralistic medical systems. For the origins of medical anthropology, we see this specialization within anthropology developing from both physical and cultural anthropology. Physical anthropologists have always been interested in issues of health and disease. They've done so in the context of forensics, for example, forensic anthropologists to identify the cause of death. Also to access or to assess the health of ancient societies. So we can also see this with physical anthropology, as well as some of the material remains in the context of archaeology as well. Cultural anthropologists were initially interested in medicine and in the context of ethnographies which dealt with people in a given area that looked at magic as well as religion, and how these were incorporated into healing systems as a whole. So not treating these as separate entities or any sort of notions of professionalization of medical care. Early work in anthropology includes that of W.H. Rivers. He did his field work in the Torres Strait, which is in the north of Australia. You can see a more detailed map there on the bottom on the right. He noted that diseases are believed to be caused by human agency, that is, they're magical in nature. They can be spiritual in nature or supernatural agency, this idea of taboo, and or natural agency. So some of these varying factors coming into play in terms of the etiology, the progression, the development of diseases as a whole. He focused on human agency, noting that the practice of medicine is a social process subject to the same laws and to be studied by the same methods as other social processes. And he insisted that the healing practices of so-called primitive people are in fact logical, systematic, and in some respects more rational than our own. And in this sense, he joins the realm of later cognitive anthropologists and those that have argued for ethnoscience in the context of traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous knowledge of local peoples. Erwin Akkernecht did a number of works in early anthropology that dealt with medicine. He was a medical doctor and he wrote a number of essays, particularly in the 1940s and 50s, that explored how ideas about diseases reflected social tensions in society, attributing diseases to witchcraft performed by political enemies, for example. He argued that the very threat of disease or being accused of causing one can serve as a powerful social sanction supporting the status quo against those who are inclined to deviate from social norms. And so here you can see the disciplinary nature of medicine, of the deviations from health to the realm of disease, and then causation has to be placed somewhere. And how that causation, the placement of that causation, can reinforce existing social norms, the existing social order. He was amongst the first to argue for the cultural construction of disease, noting that what is disease is, in the last instance, not biological fact, but a decision of society as a whole. And indeed, I think a lot of this informs Michel Foucault's later work in post-structuralism, in talking about things like, particularly in his piece on the birth of the clinic. In the 1950s, we start to see further development of anthropologists involved in the issues of health and disease. This takes place primarily in the so-called developing world, where anthropologists are involved in a series of development projects for the supposed betterment of the local population. Adams' work in 1955, he demonstrates how villagers in Guatemala resisted child nutritional programs which were supported by the World Health Organization and the Institute of Nutrition of Central America and Panama. He noted that taking of the children's blood was negatively impacting health, as the samples were seen as a permanent loss of strength. That is, that in their medical model, that the children could not regenerate substances such as blood. And so taking these away were essentially diminishing the strength of the child overall. And then in part of a larger discourse about the history of colonialism in Latin America, he notes that there's a lot of discussions about fattening up children in order to eat them. And again, this popular mythology is tied to colonialism, wherein the whites would essentially fatten up the Indians in order to eat them. And of course, this does not have to be a direct eating in the sense of a physical eating of individuals in the sense of cannibalism, but rather an eating away of individuals in the context of economic and political relations. Caudill in 1953 came up with a notion of applying anthropology in medicine, which predates the widespread use of the term medical anthropology, popular today. Paul in 1955 published a series of case studies of applied work in international and domestic public health. And so this serves as the kernel for the development of a particular subfield of anthropology, which examines a subfield of anthropology specialization, which examines the intersection of work of physical anthropologists as well as cultural anthropologists. And this is, in essence, the professionalization of medical anthropology, which occurred in 1971 when the Society for Medical Anthropology was formed under the American Anthropological Association. As of 2004, the Society for Medical Anthropology had about 2,300 members, or about 12% of the membership of the American Anthropological Association. The Society for Medical Anthropology and as a whole, and other fields, other disciplines, other aspects of medical anthropology are represented in a number of journals. This also represents a particular discipline. It becomes an academic discipline when it has materials to refer to, artifacts, in essence, of work that anthropologists have done. And so this includes things like Medical Anthropology Quarterly, Medical Anthropology, Cultural Medicine and Psychiatry, Social Science and Medicine, and Ethnomedicine. In medical anthropology, there are a number of different approaches. The cultural constructivist or interpretive approach, the ecological or ecological evolutionary approach, the critical medical anthropologist, and those that will apply medical anthropology in the healthcare setting. The cultural constructivist or interpretive approach looks at the cultural construction of sickness, of illness, of disease. So it asks questions such as how a society's understanding of and response to disease are shaped by human assumptions about the beginning and end of life, the workings of the human organisms, and the causes of ill health and misfortune. The ecological or ecological evolutionary approach, on the other hand, analyzes the interaction between sociocultural patterns and the biological and environmental parameters within which humans operate. The key focus here is adaptation, short and long-term implications for human health of different environments, and the social and cultural arrangements, including shifts in diet, would all be looked at in an evolutionary perspective. So human adaptability in given realms and given areas, and this is particularly apparent in the work of biological anthropologists who look at human adaptability, such as increased lung capacity in regions of relatively sparse oxygen. Critical medical anthropologists draw on the work of Karl Marx and focus on the political economy of health. They look at questions about how the distribution of wealth and power and the division of labor affect disease patterns as well as healthcare access. In the context, finally, anthropologists, medical anthropologists are also involved in the context of healthcare applications. This is the field of applied medical anthropology. So, medical anthropology adopts a holistic approach like much of anthropology, and it calls for an integration of all the different aspects in order to develop an approach to the study of health and disease, which first pays attention to ecological, biological, and cultural factors. Second, considers the political and economic forces that influence disease patterns and affect access to healthcare resources. And finally, offers an opportunity for health-promoting interventions. Medical anthropology answers or attempts to answer many different questions, and hence there's a number of different issues of study for medical anthropologists as they integrate the four different approaches in medical anthropology in a holistic approach. So anthropologists in a particular research study might focus on one of these particular aspects in relation to a particular illness, disease, whether this be physical, mental, social. And so these would include things like health ramifications of ecological adaptation and maladaptation, popular health culture and domestic healthcare practices, local interpretations of bodily processes, so what exactly is going on in the body, changing body projects and valued bodily attributes, so what are some things that individuals desire, how will individuals discipline themselves in order to attain these said characteristics. We can think about this in the United States, things like larger muscle mass, darker skin for tanning, lighter skin with whitening creams, the discussion about what type of hair, how that should be controlled and whatnot, perceptions of risk, vulnerability, and responsibility for illness and healthcare, risk and protective dimensions of human behavior, cultural norms, as well as social institutions. And you can see those last two, they really tie in with curbing the advance of certain infectious diseases, as well as both historically as well as in contemporary contexts. And we'll get more into that with some discussion of HIV/AIDS, Ebola, and the whole area. Preventative health and harm reduction practices, the experience of illness and the social relations of sickness, the range of factors driving health, nutrition, and healthcare transition, ethnomedicine, pluralistic healing modalities and healing processes, the social organization of clinical interaction, so actually studying what happens in a clinic itself, looking at things like power relations, who's responsible for what, bureaucratic frameworks within hospitals, for example, how patients are directed through various medical practitioners, specialists, in different models and then the patient perceptions of that as well. The cultural and historical conditions shaping medical practices and policies, medical practices in the context of modernity, colonial and post-colonial social formations, the use and interpretation of pharmaceuticals and forms of biotechnology, the commercialization and commodification of health and medicine, disease distribution and health disparity, differential use and availability of government and private healthcare resources, the political ecology of infectious and vector-borne diseases, chronic diseases, and states of malnutrition as well as violence, and the possibility for a critically engaged yet clinically relevant application of anthropology.